So something happened this last week that you all witnessed. You were a part of it. And it happens every year, but for some reason for me this year, it really just hit different. And I'm speaking about the time change that happened last Sunday. The time change that makes 6 p.m. now feel like midnight. You know what I'm talking about? It's barely dinner time, and I'm wondering why the kids are still awake. Like it feels so late, so early. I feel like vitamin D supplements are their own food group at this time of year. I just miss the sun. And here's the thing, with the time change and it getting dark so incredibly early, we can joke about it, and I clearly do, but there's something real about how darkness affects us. When it gets dark early, it does something to our mood, our energy, our sense of what's possible. It feels heavier somehow. It's not just that we need to turn the lights on earlier. It's that something shifts inside us, but we use lights to kind of push back against it. Full disclosure, I put up our Christmas lights yesterday, the earliest I've personally ever put up Christmas lights. But after it feeling so dark this week, I just wanted more light. But putting up lights when it was 70 degrees felt weird. I'm not complaining, but it felt weird. But today's passage, Isaiah 9, to have it be read this early, perhaps also feels a little weird. Because it's normally a Christmas passage for us. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Can you hear Handel's Messiah in the background, just as I say those words? But today, before Advent even starts, I invite you to hear it differently. I invite you to hear it perhaps closer to the way Isaiah's original audience heard it. Because when Isaiah spoke these words 27-ish hundred years ago, people weren't thinking about Christmas pageants and nativity scenes. They were thinking about survival. For them, the darkness coming early was not about a time change. It was about what was happening in their world right around them. So let's go back to about 700 BC. The northern kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes, are gone. The Assyrian Empire has wiped them out. They've been assimilated. They are dispersed. They are fractured. And the Assyrians, this empire that was invading, were not known for a gentle, peaceful occupation. They were known for striking terror into their enemies and their neighbors, for making examples of conquered people so thoroughly that other nations would just surrender and pay tribute and wouldn't dare put up a fight. And now Assyria, this large conquering empire, has its eyes set on Judah, the southern kingdom, on Jerusalem, on King Hezekiah, who's trying his best to be a faithful king, while there is this existential threat at their doorstep. Imagine going to bed every night, wondering if tomorrow is the day your people cease to exist. That's the darkness Isaiah is talking about. Not metaphorical darkness in a far-off sense, but an actual we might not survive tomorrow. We are in the heart of darkness. When it got dark early for them, it meant enemy armies, occupied territories, and the very real possibility that they would be erased from history. Into that terror, Isaiah speaks. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. The tense here is interesting. We have this in past tense. The people who walked have seen. But this is not a past tense passage. This is a prophetic passage, and it points to a prophetic tool that we see used, in that the past tense would be lifted up to imply with it a sense of certainty, that it will happen. God's already ordained that it will occur. Even if it hasn't happened yet, we can speak to it with that same certainty. It's as good as done. God's promise is so sure that you can speak of it in past tense. Light has shined, even though they're currently in darkness. That's how reliable God's word is. It was 2,700 years ago. But the passage is different for us. We read it differently, and we often read it, as I said, leading up to Christmas, or perhaps even on Christmas Eve. So the future promise of a child hits differently, because when we read it, we can say that it already happened. Jesus has already been born. We see it and we point to Jesus, the ultimate light, the ultimate leader, the ultimate answer. But the message from Isaiah was a real one to the people needing hope then. He wasn't asking them to wait 700 years. He was saying, this is the hope for you to take with you today. They needed to know what kind of leader God promises, what God's kingdom actually looks like when everything around them looks like chaos. And that's where King Hezekiah comes in. Hezekiah was not perfect, no king is, but he was genuinely trying to lead faithfully. He trusted God when the Assyrian army surrounded Jerusalem. He instituted religious reforms. He sought wisdom. He wasn't the ultimate fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, but he was a sign pointing towards it. He gave people a glimpse at what godly leadership could look like when it gets dark early in the world. This is at least a part of what Isaiah is describing in verses 6 and 7 that we hear perhaps most often from this passage. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Great will be his authority, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. I think it's worth breaking this section down just a little bit because there's a lot of meat in here. It starts off with the 4 titles, starting with Wonderful Counselor, pointing that this is something about wisdom. It's not just about intelligence, it's more about discernment, the ability to see what's actually happening and to make decisions accordingly. I don't know about you, but I've met a lot of people who are very smart but aren't very wise. They may know a lot but don't have great judgment when the stakes are high. This is speaking to wisdom that comes from God, to those who seek God's guidance before making those decisions, to the kind of leader who asks what's right before asking what's popular. The second title we have is Mighty God. This isn't just about strength. It's not about how much we can bench press, but it's about the strength that comes on reliance on God's powers, on God's power. I think this speaks to the courage to do hard things, to stand firm when it would be easier to cave, because leadership requires courage. It requires showing up even when you'd rather hide under the covers, which can be tempting when it's dark and cold outside. Everlasting Father. This speaks to relationship. It speaks about care, about nurturing, protecting, tending sort of leadership. In the New Testament, we see this clearly in Jesus as the Good Shepherd. We see it in Paul writing to the Thessalonians that he cared for them like a mother cared for her own children. This is not distant, authoritative, I told you so type of leadership. It's leadership that knows people's names, that notices when someone's struggling, that shows up with a casserole or a frozen dish, or perhaps a text saying, I've been praying for you. How are you doing? The 4th title is Prince of Peace. Prince of Peace. This isn't about the absence of tension or disagreement. Think about the tension that was happening as the Assyrian army was surrounding them. But instead, it's actually about reconciliation, about peacemaking, about unity building, about making peace where there's division. For blessed are the peacemakers, Jesus said. Not blessed are those who avoid conflict, but blessed are those who make peace. There's a difference between those two. And then verse 7 adds, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness. This passage is pointing us towards leaders who care about what's right, not what's easy, who notice when systems aren't working fairly and have the courage to say so. Now, we can read all of this today and go through these titles, and we can say, yeah, it's describing Jesus. Jesus is the light that shines in the darkness. Jesus is the leader that perfectly embodies all of these qualities. Jesus is the one who establishes God's kingdom with justice and righteousness forever. We're not confused about pointing this to Jesus. But we also have to acknowledge that even though Jesus has been born, and he's been born for a while, we're not there yet. We're not in the new heaven and the new earth. We're still in this in-between time. We still walk in darkness sometimes. And part of what makes darkness scary and why we see darkness and light as a metaphor here, and we'll see it a lot in the Gospel of John coming up here in a month or two, is that darkness limits what we can see, what we know, what we perceive to be true. When we can't see clearly, when we don't know what's ahead or what's around the corner, that's part of that fear. There's a reason that haunted houses are always dark. Because they want to hide things and people in the darkness. Darkness makes everything feel more uncertain, more threatening as we lose our bearings. And when it gets dark early in our world, literally and metaphorically, not just Assyrian armies, although we certainly have reasons for global situations to give us pause, but we also see it in division that splits families. We see it in war and violence. We see it in systems that feel broken. We see it when families and children are hungry. We can turn on the news and see it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We know there's grief that won't let go. We know there's illness that changes everything. We know there's loneliness that aches. There's fear and uncertainty about the future. We know there are struggles too heavy to carry. And we know that it's also getting dark in our churches. There's a feeling of darkness across mainline Christianity right now. Churches around our country are seeing lower attendance, aging congregations, cultural shifts that make us wonder what the future holds for churches like ours. Churches not far that have sold their building or dissolved their congregations. We're not entirely sure what the future looks like, but we're sure that things are changing. That we know, but it still feels like we're walking in the dark sometimes. The early nightfall, the time change this last Sunday, is a perfect metaphor for this as we feel like we're in a dark season, literally and figuratively. If we look at how we combat the dark, we need light. We need hope. We need to know what we're looking for in leadership to help share that light and to give us that hope and that path and that direction forward. And that brings us to a special day we have here today. Because in about 10 minutes or so, we're going to have a congregational meeting to elect officers for the coming year. Elders, deacons, and leaders for our nominating committee. None of them are Jesus. We're not electing saviors. We're not electing people who will fix everything or be perfect. If that's the job description, we're all disqualified, and I'll be the first to be disqualified. But we are recognizing people who point us towards Christ. People who exhibit Christ-like qualities. People in whom we see glimpses of that Isaiah 9 vision, especially when it gets dark early and we need leaders with light to help us find our way. So we're looking for people with wisdom. People who seek God's guidance, who ask good questions, who can discern what's happening underneath the surface of situations. People who've demonstrated good judgment in their lives and in their service to the church. We're looking for people with strength, not bluster or bravado, but genuine courage. People who can have hard conversations, who can stand firm on what matters, who don't just tell us what we want to hear, but who draw their strength from God, who recognize that this work is too hard to do on our own. We're looking for people who care, who notice when someone's missing, who follow up, who create space for others to be heard, people who lead with gentleness and nurture others' gifts. People who see leadership not as directing, but as tending. We're looking for peacemakers. You know, one thing that came out in the CAT survey is we are a very rare church in today's world. We are what is described as a politically purple congregation in a time in living history where churches have never been more polarized. So we need leaders who can hold space for disagreement without letting it become division. Who can say, we can be a community, we can come around the table even when we don't agree about everything. People who model what it looks like to love people they disagree with. We're looking for people who care about justice and righteousness. Who notice when something isn't right and have the courage to name it. To ask who's being left out. Who's being hurt? And how can we do better? Ultimately, we're looking for people called to serve. For Jesus said, the greatest among you will be the servant of all. The leaders we need are people who've already been serving not for recognition, but because they love Christ, they love this community, and want to see us flourish. You know, one of the hallmarks and one of the great things about our Presbyterian system is we don't just elect professional Christians. That's another way to say that anyone in the church can go to any role in the church, not just clergy. There are very few things that only clergy can do in our Presbyterian system. We recognize and lift up people among us, people who are exhibiting these qualities, and we say as a body, we see Christ in you. We see these gifts. Will you use them in service? The people nominated for leadership today aren't perfect. They'll make mistakes. They'll have bad days. They'll wonder what they've gotten themselves into, probably around March. They'll know and realize that they can't save us and they can't be everything to everyone. But they can point us towards Christ. They can help us live as Christ's people, as a community founded on Christ. They can embody, even imperfectly, some of these qualities we see in Isaiah. They can be signs of the light that is coming even in a time of darkness. They can help share this light in our lives and in our churches. They can be the people who trust that the light is still real, still present, still coming. And we need to live and embody that as a congregation because the light is coming. Not just someday, but now. Not just in heaven, but here. Every time someone chooses wisdom over convenience, the light shines and grows a little brighter. Every time someone shows courage rooted in faith, the light shines. Every time someone cares for another person with tenderness, the light shines. Every time someone makes peace instead of war, the light shines. Every time someone stands up for justice, the light shines. That's what our leaders do. That's what we do. We're not just waiting for the light, we're participating in it. We're bearing it. We're reflecting it into dark places. And that's why we have hope. Not just for our congregation, but for the church, for the world, because God keeps raising up people who point towards Christ. God keeps speaking light into darkness. God keeps fulfilling promises that seem impossible. The same God who spoke hope into Hezekiah's terror is the same God who sent Jesus as light in the world, of the world. And that God is still at work, still calling, still sending, still shining. And that's the ultimate promise of this passage, that light shines in the darkness, that it has dawned, it is dawning, and it will dawn fully. We're in that in-between time. We're after resurrection, but before Christ's return. We're after starting transformation, but before seeing fully where it leads. But we must hold on to the trust and the faith that the light is real, that the hope is real, that the promise is real, and we need to be joyful to be a part of it. For Isaiah spoke into genuine terror and said, light is coming. Jesus came and said, I am the light of the world. And here today, let us say yes. Let us be the people who bear Christ's light. Let us follow Christ-like leaders who show us the way. Let us serve the God whose promises are so certain we can speak of them in past tense. So later today in the service, here in 5 minutes, when we vote on affirming the slate of officers your nominating committee has prayerfully discerned, know that this is not about filling positions. It's not about filling slots. It's about recognizing the light of Christ in fellow believers. It's about you saying, we trust God is at work in you. We trust God will work through you. You're participating in God's promise that light shines in darkness. I don't have to tell you that the darkness in our world and in our lives is real. You know it. When it gets dark early, we feel it. But the light is even more real. The hope is more true, and the promise is far longer lasting. It's not wishful thinking. It's prophetic certainty. It's God's word that's speaking the future in past tense because God's word is that reliable. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. On those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined.